want the fight. I say, get up, stand up, get up, stand up, get up, stand up, get up, stand up. Stand up for your life. Get up, stand up, get up, stand up, get up, stand up, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up, get up, stand up, get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight. I say, preacher man, don't tell me heaven is under the earth. I know you don't know what life is really worth. It's all that Jesus gold. That's the story and never been told. Now you see the light. Hey, stand up for your right. Get up, stand up.
Hello, Caul. Can you just tell us what we're here today for?
Okay, today we're here because we've called a number of people from Victims Unite, people who say that they've been a victim of injustice. One way or the other, the system has let them down. So I've put out a call to say that, look, these public authorities are being backed up by the judiciary, and we need to expose that judiciary with evidence which we have of criminal activity by the judiciary. And we say, or I'm saying, if we expose a lack of integrity in the system, then we create a platform where we can bring all these cases as proof of the injustice we've suffered. So that's why we've come out here today. It's the start of a 10-day campaign, and I mean, there's only a few people out here at the moment, but we hope that's going to be built on.
And can you name these judges for us now?
Oh, absolutely. I've got Lord Justice Toulson. Lord Justice Toulson is responsible for presiding over a matter which his brother, Alan Toulson, was prosecuted. From that hearing, which was done behind my back without any legal representation, Justice Toulson issued a warrant for me to be picked up off the street and brought straight to prison without charge or trial. I was picked up and spent 2 months in Pentonville prison before the prison authorities realised I shouldn't have been there and brought me back to court, and I was released by Mr. Justice Buckley. Lord Justice Thomas is guilty of perverting the due course of justice. Whilst in prison, serving an unlawful 6-year sentence, I issued a writ seeking an application for a writ of habeas corpus, and having been secured a hearing date, Lord Justice Thomas ordered the prison governor not to produce me for my hearing. Now, during that 6-year sentence, Mr. Justice Elias, having filed my right of appeal against that conviction, having been wrongfully convicted, I filed an application seeking permission to appeal. Now, it went to the first judge, he refused it. I renewed it to have an oral hearing in court. That is the right of everyone, the right to be heard. Now, they refused that also. They refused me legal aid so that I could not afford a solicitor, and then they refused me my fundamental right to represent myself. So I spent 6 years unlawfully locked up in prison without having had the right to be heard. Now, that was done by Lord Justice Kennedy, Mr. Justice Elias, who's now a Lord, and one other, whom his name evades me right now, but Judge Inman used to be Middlesex Guildhall Crown Court, guilty of perverting the due course of justice. Judge Pratt, a Pratt he is indeed, from Croydon Crown Court, guilty of perverting the due course of justice. Lord Justice Laws, I would go as far as to say Lord Justice Judge, the Lord Chief Judge, because his office is aware of all of this. Of course, Irvine was the biggest corrupt one of all, because he got instructions from Buckingham Palace to investigate these issues and disobeyed the Queen. And that's why he was sacked in June 2003, and that is why the Lord Chancellor's Department was abolished and the Ministry of Justice created. They are so desperate to keep these facts, the facts of judicial criminality, out of the court, that they are prepared to allow me to break the law without fearing any repercussions. And I'm going to show you an example of that. A bailiff turned up at my door, and having shut the door in his face, he then kicked it. So I went to my kitchen and I pulled out a machete. Now, I did not chase him with it, but I pulled it out, opened my door and just stood there, and they ran. They called the police, and I was duly, as you would expect, arrested. Whilst they released me on bail initially, they eventually charged me on a matter which only went before went before a magistrate's court, and I was of course convicted in the magistrate's court. I then appealed against the conviction and brought it to a Crown Court, and after a couple of potential hearings or appearances at court, when we were actually due to have a hearing, I went to court 26th of March 2012, only to be told the prosecution are offering no evidence, they're withdrawing their case, and here's the evidence, here's the proof that they sent, despite the fact that I did not deny. You just heard me say I chased a bailiff off my doorstep with a machete, a most offensive weapon, and admitted to that on police tape. They exonerated me of that. They, as I said, so desperate they are to keep this evidence out of court that they found me, quashed the conviction, and offered me all my costs. As a matter of fact, before the hearing took place, a couple of nights before, they sent the police round to my home, 10 o'clock at night, to notice me in advance in a hand-delivered note that they were not going to go ahead with their objection to my appeal. And so there's another event where I refused to pay things like TV license, and I elected to go to court, and when the date came, 2 days before the date, they wrote to me saying that they're going to withdraw the summons and there's no need for me to attend. So they are desperate, as I say, to keep the evidence of their guilt out of court and on the record. Yes, they're quite prepared to take me through the magistrate's court because it's been judged by a judge who's part of the very system. But put me before a jury, and one must realize this is a very dangerous situation, because it means if I go and harm somebody out there, that person is going to be denied justice if they're not going to prosecute me. But the likelihood, if I was to do something crazy, is that they would want to section my ass and deny me or all kind of, in fact, they would just say not fit for trial thereafter. And so I would lose my right to be heard. But of course, I'm not going to throw potentially what we have away in such a manner. But I will continue with the help of the people to do these public protests and put as much pressure on them as possible. Ultimately, no lawbreaker can be a law enforcer. And this is what they're afraid of. This is why they don't want it in there on the record, because they would have to close this down. They'd have to close it down. Article 7, the Human Rights Act, is fundamental. Guarantees no punishment without law. No lawbreaker, I repeat, can be a law enforcer. And look, at the end of the day, here it is in simple terms. With a conviction, if I wanted to join the police force, I could not join, because no lawbreaker can be a law enforcer. If I wanted to practice law, I could not practice law. Because they are so desperate to keep me out of court, and because I am so, I wouldn't say desperate, but I'm anxious to get into court, everything that I did in terms of law breaking, I've previously drove my car without insurance, without tax. I would go in petrol stations, fill out my tank and not pay but leave my details. And despite all of these things, if I got pulled in my vehicle, the next thing an officer would say is, okay, as soon as they found out who I was, okay, Mr. Grant, have a safe journey home. And so I was being allowed to break the law, yeah? So eventually it got to a point where I decided, okay, it's either you get me into court or you leave me the hell alone. And so I decided to lend my services to anyone who was prepared to pay me to bring whatever they wanted to in the country. I confess that. And I was bringing in cannabis. And they were allowing me to pass through customs unhindered, despite the fact that they knew what I was doing. And it came to a point where eventually I was stopped, but I was stopped only because the suitcase I had 2 suitcases coming through with cannabis. Both had equal quantity of cannabis. There was one suitcase with my details. That one they allowed to come around as normal, uninterfered. And the second one did not have my details on. They did not know that it belonged to me, and they had stopped it. But because as soon as it came round, I realized that it'd been interfered with because I could smell the cannabis. But the idea was either you let me through or you get me into court. So I wasn't, having realized that they'd interfered with the suitcase with the cannabis, I weren't running. I was prepared to be prosecuted. The whole point thereafter was whether I would get a fair trial, and failing the trial, whether I would get an appeal, be allowed to go through the appeal procedure as is required in law. But yes, they were quite prepared to allow me to bring whatever it was that I was bringing in without any interference. As a matter of fact, so desperate are they now and fearful that I may repeat the same thing, that I've had my passport seized and been banned for travelling for 12 years. Now, in other cases like this, anyone can do their research. Maybe 3 years banned from travelling, but I have been banned from travelling outside this country for 12 years, and that 12 years did not start until my release from prison in 2009. Some may think, well, you brought cannabis in, so therefore you're guilty. There is no law on this planet that cannot be broken if you can justify doing so. You can kill someone if you can prove you were doing so in self-defense. You could go through, in simpler terms, through a red traffic light in an emergency. So if you can justify your action, then the law excuses you. So the fact that I say that I brought cannabis in doesn't automatically mean, then in that case you were guilty. It's a question of what are the circumstances, what led to it. And as I said, fundamentally, I tried every other route into court, all the legal routes. I tried other minor law breaking, but they just ignored everything. And so I stepped it up to a level which would earn money not just to look after my family, but to fund the campaign for truth and justice. And that was the stint with cannabis.
As a matter of interest, what was the quantity that you brought in?
It was 45 kilos, and that quantity was practically sold before I brought it in, and it would have netted about 140,000 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. I had no idea there was so much money in
And
it.
is this why they put you inside for 6 years?
The sentence they gave me was 8 years. They gave me 8 years for 45 kilos of cannabis. Now, there was a prisoner next door to me, in a cell next door to me, who had a ton of cannabis and got 8 years.